Welcome to the self-learning platform by Dr. Sushma Singh. Today we start Unit 17, Social Movements and Democracy and Assessment. And our topic is Democracy and Social Transformation in India. The functioning of democratic system during the last 5 decades had brought certain positive transformation in our traditionally hierarchical society. Brahminial framework of social order has been delegitimatized. Rule of law, equal citizenship, social and economic equality have been codified in legal system and are accepted moral principles to be maintained and attained. In the process, political positions are no longer the sole prerogative of upper caste, Brahmins, Rajputs, and Baniyas. And several reasons their proportion in seat of power has sharply declined. Middle and lower caste have challenged their power. A group, though tiny, from the lowest social strata, Dalits and tribals, have also emerged as political elite and get some share in decision making of the state. They do play important, sometimes decisive role in formation of government. Similarly, women, though in a microscopic minority, have also begun to share political power and assert their rights. Thus, circle of political elite has enlarged. One of the most striking positive contribution of the system is that people from lower strata participate in electoral processes and exercise their franchise. They express their needs, expectations, grievances, and also anger against those who hold offices and desire for the change. Through their votes, they often throw out from power one set of political leaders and parties and bring others with the hope that the alternative would be better. No one can take electorate for granted as far as holding of power is concerned. In that sense, the elected representatives are accountable. They are compelled to take consent of the people at least once in 5 years. The system has provided a space for dissent, and that space is a hope for further transformation. In order to get votes once in 5 years, political leaders do resort to gimmicks and so-called populist politics, which may be lollipop. A few handful number of people do get some crumbs. This facilitates in perpetuating hope that someday all will get share in benefits and improve their lots. Democratic system has also created various institutions that to some extent maintain checks on each other. Legal mechanism provides the freedom to express opposite views and expose misdeeds of rulers. Pressures on the state are built for accountability of their actions. These provisions and scope for assertion and change by themselves are important, though not sufficient. Legal provisions and institutional mechanisms can be subjected to distortion and can be used to subvert democratic space. In fact, institutional ethos and mechanisms are increasingly getting eroded for personal power and interest. Democracy has become a game of few, irrespective of caste, gender, and religion, who have or could manipulate muscles and money power to perpetuate their personal interest. For their power, they ignore and break all the norms of democracy. Criminalization has increased in the political unabated. The present Westminster model of democracy has been manipulated to perpetuate dominance of the proprietary class. It seems whatever changes in society that the present system could bring have reached to plateau, and now it moves towards diminishing return. After 50 years of democratic system, only 40% of the population enjoys basic amenities such as potable water, education, and health. One fifth of the households still live in a state of abject or a moderate state of deprivation, such as too little drinking water, pakka house, and literacy, not to speak of access to health services. The quality of these services and satisfaction with them are far from being at a desirable level. In the midst of certain improvements in certain social service sectors, there are also some disturbing reversals. In fact, mortality rate has almost stagnated in the last decade. The nutrition level and calorie intake of the poor have declined. Almost 12 million people suffer from vitamin A deficiency. Near 50% of the children in age obstructing or reducing the opportunity for people to consciously participate in the process of society. Group of between 0 to 3 years suffer from malnutrition. Wages of the farm and non-farm sector workers in different parts of the country have not increased in correspondence with rising prices. Hence, the purchasing capacity of such workers has remained as low as in the 1980s. Despite a surplus of 65 million tons of food grains, some 320 million people go to bed hungry even every night. In 2004, deaths from starvation has been reported in several states like Orissa, Madhya Pradesh, and Rajasthan. Inequality across the social occupational groups has not declined. In fact, it has increased during the last decades. Along with this, discrimination based on gender and social status has also increased. There is a striking decline in female male ratio among children from 945 girls per thousand boys in the 0 to 6 age group in 1991 to 927 girls per thousand boys in 2001. Domestic violence to women shows no sign of decline. The practice of dowry has increased in various social groups where it never existed in the past. Similarly, atrocities against the Dalits, tribals, and minorities have increased. Economic growth in industrial sector has been high and has accelerated in the last decades under neoliberal economy. But high growth rate has not benefited the poor even to meet their basic human needs. It is by and large a jobless growth with increasing dismantling of the organized sector. Markets have not evolved safety networks for the workforce, and large section of the population is without social and economic security. The report on human development in South Asia points out that overall focus of the multilateral organizations working in the region is focused more on gross domestic product (GDP) growth and balancing budgets than on the reduction of poverty. The governments have not adopted job creation as an explicit policy commitment. During the last 5 decades of the democratic system, many poor have lost their traditional resources of livelihood, which used to provide them some relief to cope up with misery. Common resources like common land, forest, and water have been increasingly grabbed by the dominant classes and muscle men. In the name of so-called development, the state has also taken away from many tribal and non-tribal farmers their land and habitat. The victims have been forced to endorse the decision of the government. Alternative avenues, though sometimes promised, have remained on paper or provided to a few. Most of other victims of development have been left high and dry. Most of the promises that the Indian constitution on which republic is founded have so far remained unfulfilled. Article 21 promises the right to live with dignity. Article 41 directs the state to make effective provisions for securing the right to work, education, and public assistance in cases of unemployment, old age, sickness, and disablement. Article 45 also directs the state to provide within a period of 10 years from the commencement of the Constitution free and compulsory education for all children until they complete the age of 14. People vote in every election with the expectation that their representatives would sincerely fulfill these promises. Ironically, democracy is used to perpetuate power of few to decide the destiny of all. The system has been reduced to electoral engineering that works as a safety valve for vast majority of people to ventilate their grievances and reinforce their faith that something better would be done to them by the new representatives. Different political parties. Majority of the people feels helpless as they have no other way but to put faith in the system as they put faith in God that Almighty would improve their jobs. The elected representatives follow the dicta of multinational and domestic dominant classes for making economic policy which grabs their traditional sources of livelihood and security on the one hand and generates more and more unemployment and social insecurity. People have no democratic choice in influencing economic policy of the state. As Casey Suri in his article in Economic and Political Weekly had shown, with empirical data of 2004 elections that vast majority of people do not want privatization of health, education, water, forest, etc. They demand equitable distribution of assets, secured jobs, and share in benefits generated by growth. The present day development model, as C. Douglas Loomis in his book Radical Democracy observes, is anti democratic in several ways. It is anti democratic in that it requires kinds, conditions, and amount of labor that people would never choose and historically never have chose in a state of freedom. Only by giving a society one or another kind of undemocratic structure can people be made to spend the greater part of their lives laboring efficiently in fields, factories, or offices and handing over the surplus value to capitalist managers, Communist Party leaders, or technocrats. Nearly 2 decades back, Rajni Kothari rightly observed, today the state is seen to have betrayed masses as having become a prisoner of the dominant classes and their transnational patrons, and as having increasingly turned anti people. Nor has it provided the sinews of the radical bourgeois transformation from the dynamics of which a revolutionary alternative would emerge. The state in the third world, despite more valiant efforts by dedicated leaders in a few countries, have generated into technocratic machine serving a narrow power group that is kept in power by holders of security men at the top and a regime of repression and terror at the bottom, kept going by millions of hard-working people who must go on producing goods and services for the system. For if they did not, everything would collapse. Next point is rising expectations, frustration, and the democratic system. Number and coverage of social movement in different forms have increased in all societies, including in democratic system. This is primarily because the rising aspirations of the people are not adequately met by existing political institutions, which are rigid or incompetent. Many scholars, such as Hinginton, Rajni Kothari, and several others, observe that as the gap between expectations of people and performance of the system widens, mass upsurge in the forms of movements increase. Alan Turing and the Jurgen Habermas argued that democratic system in post-modern society is not able to guarantee individual freedom, equality, and fraternity. In the view of these theorists, democracy is degenerating into an authoritarian technocratic state. The state in turn has become subjugated to market forces. The state's technocracy and the forces of the market thus dominate people. There are no longer workers, but only consumers. The old class of workers has ceased to be a class in production process. Instead, people's main social role has become that of consumers. In this role, people are manipulated entirely by the market. For Habermas, social movements are seen as defensive reactions to defend the public and the private spheres of individuals against the inroads of the state system and market economy. While highlighting limitations of parliamentary democracy in India, A.R. Desai argued in 1960s the parliamentary form of government as a political institutional device has proved to be inadequate to continue or expand concrete democratic rights of the people. This form either operates as a shell within which the authority of capital perpetuates itself, obstructing or reducing the opportunities for people to concisely participate in the process of society, or is increasingly transforming itself into a dictatorship where capital sheds some of its democratic pretensions and rules by open, ruthless dictatorial means. Public protest will continue till people have ended the rule of capital in those countries where it still persists. They will also continue against those bureaucratic totalitarian political regimes where the rule of capital has ended, but where, due to certain peculiar historical circumstances, Stalinist bureaucratic totalitarian political regimes have emerged. The movements and the protests of people will continue till adequate political institutional forms for the realization and exercise of concrete democratic rights are found. Rajni Kothari also believes that democracy in India has become a playground for growing corruption, criminalization, repression, and intimidation of large masses of the people. There is discontent and despair in the air, still highly diffuse, fragmented, and unorganized. But there is a growing awareness of rights felt politically and expressed politically, and by and large still aimed at the state. Whenever a mechanism of mobilization has become available, this consciousness has found expression, often against very heavy odds, against a constellation of interests that are too powerful and complacent to shed the privileges. At bottom, it is consciousness against a paradigm of society that rests on deliberate indifference to the plight of the impoverished and destitute, who are being driven to the threshold of starvation by the logic of the paradigm itself. In such a scenario, mass mobilization at the grassroots levels is both necessary and desirable. Electoral system, political parties, and established trade unions do not provide space to the masses to bring social transformation. In their place, there is emerging a new arena of counteraction, of countervailing tendencies, of countercultural movements, and more generally of a counter challenge to existing paradigms of thought and actions. Here we want to wind up this lecture. Thank you so much for your attention.